Welcome to Adulting on the Spectrum. I am Andrew Comero, an autistic certified financial planner. I co-run Adulting on the Spectrum with my host, Eileen Lamb.
Hey everyone, I'm Eileen Lamb. I'm an author and photographer from France living in Texas. I'm autistic and my two sons are on the spectrum as well. In this podcast, we want to highlight real voices of autistic adults, not just inspirational stories, but we want to hear about everyone on the spectrum. We want to give a voice to people like us. And today our guest is Fiona. Do you want to introduce yourself?
So my name is Fiona O'Leary and I'm from Ireland, from Cork, Ireland, and I have 5 children. 3 of them are autistic and I'm also on the spectrum, and I'm an autism advocate for 8 years now, campaigning against dangerous quack treatments for autism and just really talking a lot about women on the spectrum as well. I've got a diploma in autism studies and I have lived a life, half my family is autistic. And I suppose I want to just talk about a few issues in relation to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Mm.
So we start by asking our guests how they like to identify themselves, because, there are so many differences, autistic, person with autism, and also if you could give us your preferred pronouns, that would be great.
Well, I identify, I'm she or her, and I say I'm autistic, but also that I have Asperger's because that is my diagnosis. I don't really get hung up on those things per se, because I think what's so important when autistic people are talking or trying to give their life experience of being on the spectrum, that we don't word police them all the time and how they express themselves. And I've seen that as a problem in my advocacy work. So if someone says they're Asperger's or autistic or with autism, that doesn't really annoy me, as long as they're getting a chance to talk about their lived experience of being on the spectrum.
And so one thing that's interesting too, right, is I think it's only in the United States, right? Do we really have the DSM-5? Otherwise, is it ICD-10 or 11, whichever one it is, or whatever manual that we're is using elsewhere. And it's also what people know, what they were, diagnosed with. And at the end of the day, I feel like a person should be able to refer to themselves however a person would like to refer to themselves without being shamed for it. So no,
yeah,
thank you.
I think that's really important. I think that's becoming a big problem in the community, is where people are expressing themselves and they're being berated for using words that maybe other people don't agree with. But like the goal for me is giving people the independence and the platform to express themselves, because it's very hard for a lot of autistic people to do that. Even for myself, I can talk, but I have communication problems too, which is part of being on the spectrum. So when someone has the courage to come out and talk about issues, I think we need to support them and not start attacking them about how they express themselves on the spectrum.
And actually talking about just communication issues, and I got a little sidetracked, which, I mean, that will absolutely happen, is I really hate voice memo recording, and I really hate everything audio, and I will not listen to voicemail messages, like if the transcription isn't recorded. But I will do my best to try to meet somebody where they are. So assuming I'm in a place where I can listen to the recording, like Fiona, you've sent voice memo recordings and I will listen to. It's not my preference, but I type back. That's probably not your preference, right? So just meeting people where they are and recognizing that nobody's an expert. Just because you have autism doesn't mean that you're an expert in all things autism, right? You're just an expert in your autism, right?
Yeah. That is the most, that is key. I mean, that is so key, because it is a spectrum and we're all different on the spectrum. Like I've got 3 boys on the spectrum. Yes, we have a lot of common traits, but we're very, very different. And, they express themselves differently to me and I to them. And that's great, because if we were all doing the same thing, we'd be like, it's not, for me, it's very important that we're allowed to express how we feel comfortably. That's the most important thing.
So you say you have Asperger's, and because the diagnosis you got. That's how you were diagnosed. Can you tell us a bit more about your autism journey? Like, when were you diagnosed? What was it like?
I was diagnosed in college, actually. I was studying autism studies in Cork University College. And I mean, I knew Eileen, and I knew that I was on the spectrum all my life, really, truthfully. And I tried to get a diagnosis many times, especially when my second son was diagnosed, because I would have gone to my doctor, you know, kind of telling him that I had anxiety issues. I had struggles with like communication, social skills. And I could see in my boys myself. It was almost like me as a child, really the same. And I was turned away. You know, doctors then were saying, this is a male condition, you know, that women don't get diagnosed autistic. And that went on for many years. And then in 2013, I just went and got a diagnosis myself. And I had a bad experience the first time. Actually, the person that diagnosed me wasn't qualified, which was really a horrendous experience for me and for other people that had gone through her as well. It was a woman in Ireland. I'm not naming her. Then I went and I got a diagnosis through the health board here in Ireland, which took longer, but it was a completely different experience from the person I'd gone to prior, meaning I met with them several times. It was much more thorough. And I was diagnosed autistic. Asperger's was the term. But like that didn't really, you know, I didn't get hung up on the wording. What was important for me was that I realized who I was. I realized that, you know, I'm just a different operating system. You know, my brain is wired differently, because I don't know what it was like for anyone else here, but when you get a diagnosis as an adult, I think you spend a lot of your, you know, youth trying to fit in, trying to feel like you can be someone like everyone else. Masking is a word I will use, which is often used with women especially. So really the stress around trying to not be me growing up was terrible. And then when I realized, you know, that I am like my boys, it was liberating. I felt, you know, almost that I could belong in myself. And it took many years, Eileen and Andrew, for me to kind of accept that as well. So when you get a diagnosis, you've got that you know, you're diagnosed, then you have to kind of process that. And autistic people, it can take longer, but it's definitely changed my life in a good way. You know, I don't feel the need to put pressures on myself where I did before. And like, if people don't get me, that's fine. I don't want to change me for other people. So it was a positive thing in my life. And it's helped me understand. I mean, I think that I can bring something to the family, being autistic as well, that I understand the boys maybe a little bit deeper, you know, than other people, because I understand the challenges they have better, because I have them too.
And now you had been trying to get a diagnosis for quite a while, and it obviously getting a diagnosis is very different, not just in different countries, but depending where you live in a certain country and different, you know, economic statuses. Although I've had a diagnosis other places, I just happen to be close to Yale that has lots of studies. So they will, of course, you know, test you for free if you go through and be a guinea pig in a study. And so I've had the pleasure of doing that, among other diagnoses. But you face a lot of uphill battles, but that was many years ago, right? We're getting close to like a decade ago. Do you think if you were to go through that same process today, that you would have faced as many uphill battles? Or
No, I don't think so. I think that we've improved a lot, especially understanding women. And I know that from engaging with other women who have, you know, had a diagnosis in recent years, there was definitely a bias there. And actually, it's interesting for me because I actually got all my notes through Freedom of Information Act, because I had seen psychologists in my teens. You know, I'd gone through that. I had an eating disorder in my teens, which, you know, can be very common in autistic females. There was a lot of, I don't know, I suppose red flags there that were overlooked. But when I read my notes, it really upset me, because it was so like a classic autism diagnosis, you know, literally what they were writing. But because I was a girl, I couldn't get that diagnosis. And I think that's really important, because I think when you don't have those supports when you're a teenager or when you're growing up, you know, it can be, it's again, like if I would have liked to have had that diagnosis, maybe to support me going to college or in my schoolwork, because I do, you mentioned other conditions. I have dyspraxia. I have terrible eyesight, which, you know, has caused huge problems in my life. And I suppose I was very much of a daydreamer, which is what they noted for me in school, but it wasn't that. It was really to do with me being autistic, you know, not having those supports in place like my boys have in school. It's like a completely different time. So I kind of grieved that a little bit too. And then you have to try to explain to your family, you know, and then what do they say? You don't look autistic, you know, this kind of thing that comes with that. So there's so many things that are really wrapped up in a diagnosis, and I'm still processing that diagnosis at the age of 49. I mean, I'm nearly 50. It's something that I think will take time for me to go through, because it's like every day waking up, you don't wake up and think I'm autistic, you know, but it's like most of my life I wasn't diagnosed. I'm only diagnosed like since 2013. So the rest of my life, you know, I was, I suppose, looked on maybe as being eccentric, you know, as somebody that was a bit strange as a child. That's what my mother would have called me, and always going missing, you know, and always asking questions. A very inquisitive child, but like, I do think that there's a difference between that, and I suppose that's why I think getting a diagnosis from a professional is really important, you know.
I relate to so many of what you just said. I mean, I feel like you described me as a child, like I was always getting in trouble because I was looking out of the windows, but I was also so curious. At, you know, amazing grades back then. You know, and I was shy, which, I mean, so many things that passed as personality traits. Oh, well, she's shy, she's a daydreamer. Oh, well, she's smart. And then you put all the pieces together and it's like, how did they miss this? You know, like my mom would have to prompt me to say hi, like at the bakery in France. Like say hi, like, and then I would repeat like that type of things, and I would just focus on like giving exact change with coins instead of like, you know, interacting. Like everything was there, and then it took 25 years and being in the US to get a diagnosis, because in France, I mean, even kids who are like more severe and obvious are still not getting diagnosed in 2021. So yeah, I stood no chance.
I know a lot about in France actually, and autism, and how they view autism. I've actually helped a French family. They moved to Ireland actually from France because of the kind of, you know, the situation you're referring to. So it is different from country to country. But what is really, I suppose, the most awful thing about being a woman is there is that kind of element of, you know, maybe you're just tired, you know, maybe you're just, you know, not, you know, you're stressed or something. I had a lot of that said to me. And I remember when I got my diagnosis that my doctor actually apologized to me. And that was very good for me, because I felt almost like, you know, they weren't listening. And it's sad. And actually, when I did get my diagnosis, I was on Irish television talking about this, women on the spectrum, and I met a woman and she was in her 70s. There was like, we did a talk in the college, and she came up to me and she thanked me because she had been diagnosed really most of her life, but kind of hidden away. So that's the other thing, is when you get a diagnosis, sometimes people don't want to talk about that. And I felt compelled to actually be kind of a spokesperson maybe for women in Ireland. And it's okay, you know, we're not gonna eat you. We're just people, to be positive, I suppose, about autism. And I think that's the most important thing. But also to remember, you know, that different autistic people have different needs and challenges. And that's my real concern now as an advocate, is the divide that we're seeing in the community, and how people talk about autism from their own experience as being the only experience. It's not. Like my son, you know, is very disabled, and autism is a disability, and that's fine too. And I don't have a problem saying I'm disabled, but there seems to be a problem around that word now as well. And so what I want to say is a lot of autistic people need supports. If we say autism is not a disability, they don't get those supports. Like you asked me about Ireland and autism, It's very hard for parents to get supports here. We have a government that doesn't have any, we've no Autism Act, we have no legislation. So if you got supports for your child in school, they can be taken away anytime. And that's what I fight for, because I know that my boys couldn't go to school. They wouldn't be in school unless they had a special needs assistant with them. And my son actually did very serious exams last year all by himself during the pandemic, and he did brilliantly. He did so well in his grades, and he enjoys school. He enjoys school, but without the supports, he wouldn't be doing that. So if I say autism is not a disability, can you help him? He doesn't get the supports. And I think that's really important. If we keep saying that it's not a disability, you are going to jeopardize supports for autistic people that need them, not as a luxury, but as a lifeline, a necessity. And I see that happening more now with advocates who I used to admire, that they seem to not be thinking about people like my son, you know?
Yeah.
And I that worries me. It worries me that when I'm the future, that will be a serious situation where we will see autistic people being institutionalized, which is what happened in Ireland up until 1992. My son was born in 1992. There were people on the spectrum in institutions in Ireland. And what my goal as a mother, not as a campaigner, but as a mother, is to have as much independence to my children, meaning that they can do things for themselves. But to get there, they need the supports or the tools. I use the words tools to help them achieve that. It's not something that they're equipped with. And that's what I think is really important. Helping children on the spectrum isn't a bad thing. Helping any child isn't a bad thing. If we don't teach children, they can't learn and they can't become independent. It's kind of just logic to that. And what I see a lot now in the community is like, don't be talking about your child, don't be giving them interventions. I mean, I've seen people criticize speech and language therapy. You know, don't help your child to communicate. My son couldn't talk when he was 4. He couldn't speak. He didn't start talking till after the age of 4. And he did have speech and language therapy and would have used communication cards, which I now know is linked to ABA, PECS, the system of PECS. But that wasn't a bad thing for him. You know, it helped him, and he loves talking. He never stops talking. So I've had people give out to me about that, which really upsets me.
Since you're talking about it, ABA, you know, my oldest son is 8 and he has like 20 words. So he's basically nonverbal, non-speaking. He uses AAC to communicate. That's what he learned in ABA therapy. ABA is very controversial, and I know we don't agree. That I'm in favor of ABA and you're not. And I'm so thankful that we're able to have this discussion, you know, in a respectful way, even though we don't agree. Can you tell us what you don't like about ABA?
Well, I'll tell you, when Dylan, my son is Dylan, my first son, he's my son that has had cancer as well, which I will talk about as well. When he was diagnosed in 1994, they wanted Dylan to go to a school. It was like an ABA school away from me. Like he would go away from Monday till Friday. And I was like, no, he's not going away. And I suppose at that time, and what I want to say about ABA is that there has been abuses of ABA, meaning it's down to the person, like the teacher or whoever is, there's been cases of that. Like, of course I'm against that. And I think that's what ABA has kind of been pushed out there by a lot of advocates, that it's abuse. But like what I read today, and I did do this today prior to talking to you, Eileen, is I looked up ABA as of now, and what it means, and it means positive reinforcement. So it means like you reward a child for doing something good, be it their homework or whatever. And in the reality of things, like I think that we're doing that anyway with our children every day. You know, it's like, you know, put your put your socks or your dirty clothes in the washing machine, you know, good boy or good girl or whatever. So like even in school here in Ireland, what they do is they do rewards with the children anyway. But with my sons, they might get a star, you know, like a star on their shirt, or they'll get a certificate like the best student. And I suppose what I'm seeing now is that's wrong as well. So it's like positive reinforcement, I don't have a problem with. And if that's what ABA is, and it's carried out, you know, if it's carried out in a non-abusive way, I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with ABA is maybe the routine is a bit intense. You know, for me with Dylan when he was growing up, it was something that I didn't sign up for. But in his communication, you know, therapy, they were using PECs, they were using communication cards, and that was not abusive to my son. In fact, he enjoyed it. It wasn't like he was having grueling hours of, you know, being down like in a work or situation. That there was a therapist that would come to our home and spent an hour with Dylan, maybe a few times a week. And it worked. And he started talking to me. I mean, he had no words at all. And one day he just went, "Hello, mummy." I actually thought, I was in the kitchen and, you know, we were very young. I had Dylan, I was 21. You know, we were just like thrown into parenthood. But I was in the kitchen washing dishes and I heard this little voice go, "Hello, mummy." And I thought there was a ghost because he'd never said anything to me. And we have a recording of him actually when he said that. And it was so wonderful. And the thing is, when he started talking, Dylan, he really enjoyed talking. It was a lot of autistic people don't want to do that, but Dylan is a talker, and he never stops talking. But like, I mean, it wasn't abuse what they did with Dylan in the communication with Dylan, but it wasn't known as ABA. I suppose back then ABA for me would have been linked to, you know, some of the horrible things we see from the past. Some documentaries were made. I saw a documentary in England which was kind of distressing, but like it could be the same in school. You could have a teacher that could be abusive to a child. It's down to the person. And if a mother and father or parents are with their children and the child is happy, then, you know, I think that maybe people maybe need to rethink what that is. But you have to help your child to learn. Like I saw your video as well about children running onto the road. Dylan was like that. Dylan was like running away all the time. And I used to be like having a heart attack, literally. And even our wedding day, there's actually a photo. There was no photos of me and my husband because we were running around after our son because he was always like that. And I was always scared, you know. So looking back, you know, we use techniques to help him not hurt himself. But that's what parents do. And I think being an autistic parent helps a lot because I can see, I suppose, what I saw with my kids, especially with Dylan, because he had a lot of problems when he was small, that I was able to read almost things that would trigger him to have a meltdown. Like he could get very stressed with people that he didn't know, or the faces were not familiar. I was able to kind of get down to his level and understand and not only predict situations, so he had less meltdowns. And actually by the age of 7 or 8 he wasn't having meltdowns anymore at all. I mean, it was like I knew him. I went into his kind of environment, I suppose. But like Dylan did have help, you know. Dylan had OT, he had speech and language therapy, he went to a special play school from a very early age, from maybe 2.5. You know, I did that because I wanted Dylan to have the best chance in his life, and it stood by him with what's happened to him recently.
And
He's
speaking of
yeah.
Dylan, Dylan has recently gone through cancer treatment during the pandemic.
Yeah.
What was that like for your family, as well as Dylan, if you feel comfortable sharing for him?
It was so hard. I mean, like I'm we knew that Dylan was, you know, waiting for a scan. He had a lump. He got a lump in his neck, and you know, they did his blood work and we were waiting for the scan, and then out of nowhere, it's cancer. So we went from like just being kind of concerned and being hit with this diagnosis. And it was at the time when Ireland was having the worst cases of COVID, you know, really high numbers, people locked in their houses. And literally within 24 hours, I'm told that Dylan has lymphoma and that he would be starting chemo in 24 hours. So just imagine, I had to tell Dylan that he was going to have chemo. Dylan had never been in a hospital. Dylan does not like hospitals at all. I mean, when his granny was sick a couple of years ago, he didn't want to go in. So I was thinking, how am I going to get my autistic son to even have a needle put into his neck? So first they had to do a big biopsy on his neck. And then he had to have a PET scan, which involves drinking a sugary liquid, a dye, which is radioactive. So he had to be told all of that. And then we had the huge issue of consent, because they knew that Dylan was autistic, that he, you know, has a disability. Do we tell Dylan what's happening to his body? Do we advocate for him, or does he do it himself? So we had I had like an hour to make this decision for my son. You know, there was no time to be wasted. He had cancer. And we decided that Dylan should be the person that, you know, is told this, because he's 28 years old. And he was amazing. He sat down with the oncologist. They told Dylan he had cancer. They told him what they were going to do. And he took it with such dignity. And he went through every round of chemo, with such, I don't know, I'm amazed by him. I mean, he just did what he was meant to do. He did the treatment plan, and he never missed one session of chemo. He never got sick. I mean, he never threw up. You know, everyone was telling me he's going to throw up, that he's not going to eat his food anymore. Dylan had to start loads of medicines as well, steroids, antibiotics. He was on like antiviral medications that AIDS patients take. So he had all of this going into his body. He had lost his hair, you know, his beautiful red curly hair. And the only way he coped, and I mean this, and my husband and I are going to write something about Dylan, because it was because he had those tools. He had those tools to be an independent person, to speak for himself, and to actually be able to ask questions to his oncologist. You know, I mean, if I hadn't given Dylan those tools or helped him when he was younger, he wouldn't have been able to do this. There's no doubt in my mind, because he wanted, I suppose, in a way, to get, you know, his goal through all this was to get back to his friends, because Dylan goes to a service provider and he misses his friends. And when he was called for the first vaccine for COVID, which was during his chemo, he was so happy, because he was saying, Mom, I'm nearly there, you know, I'm nearly there, one more round. But then we had to wait to see, you know, if chemo had worked. So after his last chemo, it was 8 weeks, 9 weeks before we knew. And we got the news last Thursday that Dylan is in remission, which is the best news in the world. And Dylan went to that appointment himself with his father, and he sat with the oncologist and the team. And Timmy, my husband, that's his dad, didn't have to open his mouth. Dylan did it all for himself. He let the doctor examine him. He's had problems with his feet. He's lost his toenails because of chemo. And he did it all himself. And I'm so proud of him. But I mean, it's because Dylan had those supports. He had a very good teachers in school as well that helped Dylan as well. So all of those people made Dylan the strong man he is today.
That's really amazing to hear, and that he's in remission, first of all, and that he was able to do all of this by himself. Is there anything that you wish nurses or doctor would have known about autism or about him to make the experience better?
Yes,
Could we do
I think firstly, like when you get a diagnosis of cancer, like there are organizations that you can call for counseling, but they don't have anyone trained in autism at all. So I could ring up and say, I need counseling, which I did. I had to. I mean, my world was shattered, you know, but there's nothing there for autism. Even for me, as an autistic woman, talking to a psychologist or somebody that's trained to talk to people about cancer, there's nobody trained in that field. Now, the nurses and the doctors are wonderful, but like there were times when they would not have known because the nurses changed. So every time Dylan goes for chemo, there's a different nurse. And he would tell me, he would come back, I didn't like that nurse, you know, she wasn't like the nurse the last time. And, you know, even when he went for the vaccine, Eileen, with Dylan, you know, he had the COVID vaccine. It wasn't even in his chart, you know. So I have to say he's autistic. Don't be stressing him out because he has OCD. Dylan has OCD. And I know when Dylan starts counting a lot, he counts numbers, that he's stressed. And I could see this happening. And she just kept saying things that I had already told her prior not to say that would trigger him. So even when they are informed, it's like they can't keep it, you know, because it's not compulsory. There is no training. So that's really important. And especially for somebody that gets a cancer diagnosis, if they're neurotypical or autistic, but it's harder for autistic people because of the sensory issues, going to hospital, smells, like Dylan has a huge thing with smells. He has a huge thing with hand washing. He's had that all his life. He's very good at washing his hands, but like he, you know, he used to go to chemo with his dad. I wasn't allowed to go because of COVID. There's only one person, and I used to feel his fear in me. I'm so connected to Dylan. I could feel it, and you know, I could only imagine. And I remember like him, you know, talking to me. I ring him at the hospital and he would just say to me, "Are you okay, Mum?" He'd ask me if I was okay. That's what Dylan's like. He's such a good boy. He's somebody that thinks of other people, but like, it's only because he's had that great support around him that has made him. And I mean, like, if you knew Dylan at the age of 2 or 3, you know, and you see him now, I mean, it's a very different experience. And I want to be positive about that because we were told such negative things with his diagnosis, that he would not do this, that he would not do that. And, you know, we've proven them wrong. And I suppose it's because we've just got Dylan the support that he needed to be the beautiful person he is today, you know, and believe in himself. He has so much confidence, Eileen. Like Dylan and myself, I often say to my husband, if only I had the confidence that Dylan has. But when I'm with Dylan, he makes me feel really good about myself. So he makes me feel confident when I'm just with him. He's just really rounded and strong and happy, very happy person.
And in your mind, thank you for sharing that, what makes a good autism advocate? You know, how can we do better despite our differences? And what I really appreciate about one of the things you said a little bit earlier was the fact that you really didn't know much about what ABA was beyond your own experience, and you looked it up. And I really don't think many people actually understand what it is. I mean, I'm not pretending to be an expert either. So I've been called pro ABA, or, you know, and I just think because I'm not outwardly against something that I don't understand, I'm therefore supportive of something, when I think that's probably how more people should be, is not just, you know, be mad at something that they don't understand completely. And just on that, my understanding is if, you know, if there's an individualized therapy or treatment plan that's designed to help somebody live their best life and be their best autistic self, and it's done right, then I think that's a good thing. I don't care what we call it, because, you know, a lot of times it's very complicated. So meaning like, well, insurance might call it ABA, right? And therefore it's billed more and it's paid more. Well, you know, but if it's, you know, OT or speech that is billed under ABA, you know, we don't want to like shout from the rooftop that, you know, it's insurance fraud or something, right? Or just, and again, I'm not involved in any of these insurance practices. But no, I guess what I would say is it seems to be, you know, confusing about what makes a good advocate. You know, is being a good advocate shouting really loud and screaming at parents on the internet when you disagree with them and telling them they're being horrible parents to their children? Does that change any minds? What can we do better despite our differences?
We need to talk to each other firstly in a civil way, and I think that's the problem. I mean, you're not the only one that's experiencing that kind of um, I don't know, it's terrible actually. I'm very sad because I think it's got a lot worse over the last few years. And I think that there's a certain group of people that are kind of making that an ongoing issue. Like, I'm here today. I've had a lot of, nasty comments said about coming on the show today. But I actually want things to move forward because I want something better for my kids growing up. I really, really feel that, if we don't talk about our differences, we can never resolve them. And maybe it is the wording, like you said. That's a very good point, Andrew. Maybe the word ABA is something that is, I don't know, attached to something really bad for people from the past, and maybe that's what needs to be done. But like, what's really important is that the people saying these things, a lot of them don't have children that need support, or don't have children that are in need of the tools, like I mentioned earlier, to make them independent. That for me, if that was anything I would offer for people listening today, is that your children are separate entities to you, and they have to learn how to navigate the world. And helping them navigate the world isn't a bad thing. Helping them to go in and ask for an ice cream themselves. I remember when my son did that, actually. And I remember I used to work with kids with disabilities years ago. And I was one of the people working there that was saying, hang on, don't be choosing their ice creams, let them do it themselves. And it took a bit longer because that's how it worked. But it was such a great thing to see the children doing that. And then I taught Dylan how to pay for his own ice cream. It's a process. Teaching Dylan to walk. Like, I can go walking with my son now, and I'm not worried about him going into the road in front of a car. But that took me years and years and years of doing the same thing over and over. And I walk with him. We do a walk together, 7K walk. And it's a difficult walk with hills and everything. But watching him, so if a car comes along, I don't have to say anything to him anymore. He pulls into the side of the road and he stops until the car goes past. And I'm watching him do that, and I'm thinking, this is amazing. This is a good thing. But intervention is not about taking away traits of autistic people. And that's really important. You can't take that away. You can't make someone not autistic, but you can help them to enjoy their life and to be independent. And that is not being a bad parent. And it has to stop. Actually, I'm actually at the point now where, even of late, even recently, even yesterday, some of the stuff that I see really concerns me. But like, I fight for my kids and I fight for the community because I really care. But like, if someone doesn't agree with me, or we have a differing view, you and me, or whatever, or me and Eileen, that's fine. That's fine. That's your opinion. We don't attack each other. We talk about it. And you know what? If we sat down together and talked to each other, we could probably sort a lot of this problem that we're seeing. But they don't want to open the conversation route. And I suppose that's why I'm here today, because I want to talk to people, even if they think that I'm saying something that is something they don't like. That's okay. We have to talk to each other to work together for a better future for the community.
I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, this is the biggest issue right now, is that there is no communication. I mean, it's all yelling and insults, and we don't achieve anything this way. And on that note, I really appreciate too that, you did some research on ABA, and even though, you don't love it, but you still went and tried to learn more about it. That's how we can advance. And about the autistic thing, trying to make someone non-autistic, that's one of the biggest criticism about ABA. And I really wish people would realize that, teaching someone to communicate, whether that's verbal or not, teaching someone to not put themselves in danger, like, they deserve that. It's not about them being non-autistic. It's about them having skills that everyone deserves,
Mm-hmm.
it blows my mind that some people think that it will be okay to let someone be like autistic if that meant that they don't communicate, and that's very frustrating for the person who can communicate if they just put themselves in danger because they don't understand that playing with the litter box and eating that is bad. They run in the streets. I mean, that's we're not doing them any favor if we don't teach them those skills. Like no one bats an eyes when the kids go to school and learn math or how
Mm.
to a different language. So why is teaching an autistic child skills that everyone takes for granted, seen as making them non-autistic? It doesn't make sense to me. If
But
I yeah,
it's basic parenting. I mean, when
yeah.
you are a parent, you have to protect your child. So we're doing that anyway. I mean, this is what I suppose the positive reinforcement element of it, which is something that we do it without even noticing. You know, as a mother, good boy, good girl. Praise is a good thing. And I know that with my kids in school that it's worked, you know, and I suppose years ago, if you want to go back to schooling in Ireland when I was growing up, we had corporal punishment. You know, they were hitting kids in schools. It was the norm here. You know, so being positive to a child, making them feel good about themselves for their achievements, doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just encourages them to learn. And like, to me, the most important thing for our kids is to learn to read and write, to have an education. But for autistic children, they struggle in that. You know, it's not something that you can't go to school, in my opinion, and you say that an autistic child doesn't need supports in school, because that is certainly not my experience with my children. And my two sons, not Dylan, my younger sons, would be very good academically as well, like you mentioned, good grades. But it's not about the grades alone, it's about the environment, helping them in the environment because of sensory issues, because of noise. Like my son would have problems with noises, and you know that the teachers understand that, and they give them movement breaks so that they can leave if it gets too much. So he has access to a room where he can go, and it's a lovely sensory room, and he can come back when he feels a bit better. So we fought for those supports. They haven't been given to us on a plate. Parents have had to fight for those supports. And like I said, because we have no laws in Ireland to protect autistic people, they can be taken away by the government. But if you go out there and say, I mean, I want to say this because this is important, of what I see from some advocates, that autistic people don't need support, you know, and make that general statement, if we just leave them be, they will be fine. That is not true for every autistic person. It is not true. And in my opinion, what they're doing is actually pseudoscience. It's not factual. And these are the same advocates that would be campaigning against pseudoscience or campaigning against so-called abusive treatments. In my opinion, it is abusive to not help your child to be an independent person. If you leave your child without supports as they grow, it's harder to teach them those basic things that lots of people take for granted, like you say, not running onto the road. You know, it's harder to teach an adult to do that than a child. If you teach a child those safety measures, they will learn. That's not being abusive, you know. And again, children have their own rights. They're not, you know, they're not extensions of us. And you know, teaching your child to read and write and to go out and be independent is a good thing. I'm so happy because I can let my kids go out with those skills, and they're happy to do that. They don't want to be stuck at home with mummy all day. You know, who wants to be stuck with your parents all the time? They want to be teenagers, they want to go out and do things, but if they don't have those tools, they can't do that. But that's what I'm being met with. I'm being met with anger. If I talk about my children, I'm attacked by some of these people, and it's become kind of a very frightening thing for me, because they've discussed my son, you know, who has cancer. They've talked about him, and it has to stop. But I'm willing to sit at the table with everybody to try to find a way for us to all advocate together, civilly, so that we can make a good future for autistic people, for our kids, you know, and maybe have laws in place that will protect them, you know, in employment and education, to get children to have jobs, you know, when they grow up. In Ireland, we have a very poor statistics for employment for autistic people. We're one of the worst countries in the world, you know, so things like that really matter. And again, healthcare. But like, if we're all fighting, what impression do we give to the world if we're all fighting? And there's all this name calling. Use our energy and time to be effective, to bring real change for our community, positive change.
That's the perfect way to end this. Just we need to have these discussions so we can help autistic people. That's what we all want. We want the best for autistic people. So we should really get together. We're gonna ask you some questions, Fiona. They're called quick fire questions. So you tell us the first answer that goes through your mind. Okay.
Yeah.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Don't be afraid.
What do you do to relax?
I write songs and I sing. I listen to music.
What is your favorite food?
Pasta.
I love pasta. What's your favorite film or movie?
Les Amants de Pont-Neuf, French movie, wonderful.
Another one I don't know.
Mm.
Since you are autistic and therefore good at math, how many digits of pi do you know?
I'm terrible at math. There's another myth, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, just a joke question. What is a question you would like to ask our next guest? Who's our next guest? Is it, I don't know, actually.
So random, you don't know who it'll be.
Yeah.
I think we know actually, but maybe we're just not going to tell you. So feel free to ask the question.
I would like to ask about music and autistic people and how they experience music, especially because of Andrew. Andrew and I have a love of music, and I'd really like to ask about how autistic people process music, and is it different for them? It's something that really interests me.
How do you process music?
Yeah.
Other than you like good music, because we share that in common. How do you process
How do you
music?
process it? Because I just feel for me, and even like talking to my boys as well, especially Dylan, that it's not just about listening to music, it's something else, and that kind of interests me.
It's about feelings. You feel the music.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank
And
you
by the way,
so
just
much.
before I go, actually, we have a band called Trouble in Love. We have a Facebook page, Trouble in Love. If people want to check out our songs, we did an album during lockdown last year. So it's myself and my husband. My daughter plays as well. But Trouble in Love.
Tell us where people can find you online. So Trouble in Love, anything else?
We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, iTunes. We're there. We have a little CD, an album, Trouble in Love. I mean, I'll send it to you. I think I've been annoying Andrew with some of my songs, but yeah, music is a big part of my life. Yeah, so Trouble in Love, Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. CD baby as well. CD baby. It's for free. You know, it's for the love of music.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to us today. It was
Thank you.
great.
Yeah, it's lovely to meet you, Eileen and Andrew, and keep up the good work. Yeah.
Yeah,
thank you.
too.
Yeah. Take care, guys.
Take care.
Bye.